Welcome, everyone. I'm Melanie Hardison. I'm one of the pastors here. I know most of you. We are also live streaming this morning for folks who cannot be here in person or who want to view this presentation after the fact. I know the 9 o'clock service got out a little late, so get your coffee, get a snack, and you're welcome to join us. I'm really excited to speak a little bit this morning and share with you some of the Camino de Santiago, which is an ancient pilgrimage route in Spain and other parts of Europe that leads to the city of Santiago, where we believe that the remains of the Apostle James are buried. Now, there's a couple of Jameses in the Bible, and this particular James is James, who's of the twosome, James and John, the sons of Zebedee. And so James, in his ministry in the first century CE, took the gospel to the Iberian Peninsula. So this is Spain and Portugal and part of France. And so he took the gospel to the Iberian Peninsula, and that's where he had his ministry. He was converting people to Christianity, spreading the good news. And so this was his region. And he wasn't very popular among some authorities, and so there's a big story, a big legend about what happened, but he was basically captured, brought to Jerusalem, beheaded by the king there. A couple of his followers followed him from Spain to Jerusalem, stole his body after he died, took it all the way back to Spain. They sailed around the coast and up near, there's that little inlet where you see the word Santiago, and it's believed that his remains were buried in the countryside in that part of Spain. They preserved his body well. He was unearthed in the 800s. So you can imagine 800 years later, this location is uncovered. His remains are unearthed. And of course, a cathedral was built to him in the nearby city of Santiago, and he is enshrined there. So we'll see a couple of slides that show. But this map is the Caminos of Spain and Portugal. So we talk about the Camino de Santiago, but there's actually a number of routes, and so we can also talk about it, in the plural. So we can talk about it in the plural. I don't want to put my back to you all. These are all the Camino routes. So there's a bunch of them. And if you'll go to the slide, just the little picture, I walked part of this, right? And if you'll show the big map again, the big kind of purple-looking line towards the top of the top of Spain is probably the most famous Camino route. It's called the Camino Francés, and it's so named because it starts in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, which is on the French side of the border, and then goes about 500 miles to Santiago. You probably can't see the town of Sarria, which is very close to Santiago, and I walked from Sarria to Santiago, and then about 74 miles, and then I walked about 40 more miles on one of those other caminos called the Camino Finisterre, and also part of the Camino dos Faros. And that was a total of about 114 miles that I did, and this was last month at the beginning of September. And it was an amazing experience. I had never done anything like this before. I'm a hiker and a walker generally, but to take a pilgrimage of this sort was a totally new experience for me. And people walk the Camino for lots and lots of different reasons. Some are Catholic and they go for religious pilgrimage reasons, because that's a thing in the Catholic Church. A lot go for religious reasons who aren't Catholic, that would be me, and spiritual reasons. And people go also for other reasons. I met people who were walking in memory of someone. Their loved one had always had a dream to walk part of the Camino, but they died before they got a chance to do that, and so they walked in their honor. Some people were walking as a way to work through and process some grief over a loved one. This is something they needed to do to kind of focus and let that emotion out and be in that journey. I met one woman who had just gone through a divorce, and she was about late 30s, and this was a good thing for her, but it still was a lot to process and a lot to get through and a big transition in her life. And so she was walking to process the divorce. She walked from Saint Jean all the way, and she also is an ultra marathoner, and she was walking about 20 or more miles most days. The most I did was about 15 and a half, and I'll tell you, that's plenty. So lots of people have different reasons. They walk different routes. There's different parts of the countryside to see. You can walk along the coast, you can walk through the mountains, you can walk through the plains. It's really quite a varied experience. So we say the Camino, but that means a number of different things. But one thing it does mean is that a person is on a pilgrimage of some sort, whether it's just pure adventure or whether it's a religious or spiritual or other emotional pilgrimage. There's lots of different ways to do it and approaches. If you'll advance to the pilgrimage slide. Oh wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, so here's a couple of slides. This is where the Apostle James is buried. So this is the sepulcher at the Cathedral in Santiago. This is his tomb. And so here's the thing with the Catholic Church. You can walk part of the Camino. If you walk the last 100 kilometers of any of those routes we saw, you can get what's called a pilgrim's certificate. And so you actually have a little pilgrim passport. Here's mine. You can get this in advance or get it while you're in Spain. I ordered mine in the mail beforehand. And as you go, you can collect stamps. And these I collected from hotels and restaurants and cafes all along the route. And when you get to Santiago, this is your proof to the office, the pilgrim's office in Santiago, that you have completed a certain distance, and then you can receive the Compostela. And this is the very pretty certificate I received with my name in Latin, Melanie. That's how they do it. So that's kind of a fun thing. People really enjoy getting the stamps and their different colors and their different designs, and you all are welcome to come and take a look at this. I also brought some friends with me. This is my trusty backpack that I traveled with. These are my hiking poles that I used. I had a great umbrella for the sun and the rain. And then these are my shoes. This is what I walked in, a pair of Hokas. They still have some of the soil of Spain on the sole. So just to kind of bring the experience here into this space.
How much did that weigh?
So I trained a lot for the Camino, and I trained with probably 15, 17 pounds not including water. And so I had a couple of big Nalgene bottles that I would walk with full of water, so that added a good bit of weight too. And every day it varied a little bit if I had snacks or whatever as well. But I also didn't carry everything with me. You can have porters kind of take things along the route for you if you've got a suitcase or something. But I did take most of the things each day. So there's a couple of things to know about the Camino as well that you'll see in some pictures coming up. The way you know where you're going, you can use an app on your phone. There are apps for the Camino that show you the elevation and all kinds of things. The old way to do it, before we had that kind of technology, is that there are yellow arrows pointing the way. And so if you're ever turned around or looking for where you're supposed to be, or you haven't seen an arrow in a while, that's what you're looking for. Also, the path is a very varied terrain, and so sometimes it's pavement, sometimes it's a natural path like this, sometimes it's gravel or rock or dirt or pine needles or whatever may be the path at that particular point. What I love about this photo, these are kind of magical portions of the path in my mind. Do you see where the trees come out of the ground, right? And you see all these roots? And you see how low the path is. What I think has happened here, because this is a natural path, there's no pavement, I think this is one of the older parts of the trail that has been worn down by millions of footsteps over centuries. See how low it is? And you see that a lot of places. The trees and the earth will be up here, but you're kind of walking in this tunnel. And then the trees form this canopy over you, and so you feel like you're in kind of this enchanted forest where things are above you and the light is dappled and coming through. It also can be pretty muddy if it rains. But it was just, there were parts of it that were just kind of magical, and you feel like I'm part of something so much bigger. People have been walking this path since the 900s. So I mentioned that the Apostle James's remains were found in the 800s. He was moved to the Cathedral in Santiago, and then King Alfonso I, sometime in the 900s, made the first pilgrimage, and he really got this started. The underside of all of this is that the pilgrimage to Santiago was promoted by the Catholic Church as a way to unify Christianity across Europe, mostly against the Moors. So there was a lot of cultural and religious conflict happening at that time. And so that's some of the history as well of the Camino. It's seen as this kind of great spiritual thing and this adventure, but there's really a lot to it because this has been going on for centuries. So you consider all the millions of people who have walked these particular steps, and the impact on the earth, the impact on the local economy, et cetera. There's actually a whole sub-economy that has built up around this, which is pretty neat. Here's a yellow arrow. So when you're in town, if you see the yellow arrow, you know you're going the right way. And it's a lot harder in towns to find them. But you see them in the countryside a good bit. So we're just going to scroll through some photos. You'll see landscape, you'll see farms, you'll see churches, you'll see some little shrines on the side of the road here. And there's little places you'll come along on the trail where people have left memorials to someone, usually someone who's died. And other people will come, and you'll see piles of rocks and photos and prayers written on little papers that people will leave. Sometimes they're also leaving a burden. One of the things that people do when they walk in the Camino is to leave behind a symbolic gesture of laying a burden down. And so they're walking this path, and there comes a moment where they feel emotionally, I'm ready to let this down. It could be a fear, it could be an experience they've had, whatever the case may be. And so you'll come across just randomly in the woods or at a turn, the side of the road, and so you'll see some little shrines there where people have done that, which is pretty powerful. So it's a place to just stop and pause and take a breath and be part of the sanctity of that space, the sacredness of it. You meet all kinds of people along the way from all over the world. Those are friends of mine from Hong Kong. We're still in touch on Facebook and text. I met people from all over. I mean, I could just name 15 countries, and people from different parts of the US as well. And people are walking for different reasons. This is one of the little shrines. It's actually in a building. And my uncle was having a 9-hour surgery that day, and so I left a little rock for him on the altar and prayed for him. This is another part of the trail. You'll see pavement, just walking down the road is part of it. Friends from Poland and Canada. And then lots of churches. There's plenty of opportunity to stop in little country churches, little rural areas where there's often a Catholic church, and they're often open for pilgrims. And so you can come in and you can sit and you can rest and you can pray, and it's really lovely. So before I left, I asked for prayer requests if anyone wanted me to pray for them as I walked, and I got a lot of those. And so I put them into a Word document, and I had it with me as I walked, and so I could pull it up on my phone when I was praying as I walked. Sometimes you're with people and you're talking and you're getting to know them, and sometimes you're just on your own. And so when that happened and I was wanting to have some prayer time, I would just pull up my phone, I'd scroll through that document, and I would pray for folks. That is one of the few times I got turned around is because I was praying and not paying attention to the yellow arrows. So that can happen. We did miss a slide. Phil Cousineau is a researcher and a student of Joseph Campbell's who's done a lot of work on archetype. And Phil has a book called The Art of Pilgrimage. Oh, thank you. I thought we'd gone a little too far. For millennia, the cry in the heart for embarking upon a meaningful journey has been answered by pilgrimage, a transformative journey to a sacred center. It calls for a journey to a holy site associated with gods, saints, or heroes, or to a natural setting imbued with spiritual power, or to a revered temple to seek counsel. To people the world over, pilgrimage is a spiritual exercise, an active devotion to find a source of healing, or even to perform a penance. Always, it is a journey of risk and renewal. For a journey without challenge has no meaning, and one without purpose has no soul. And I found this to be true. There's always risk, there's always renewal. It's a spiritual experience especially to put those things in conversation with each other. And there's always some sort of transformation that takes place. I suppose you could walk something like the Camino and not be transformed. I don't know how that would be. I think it depends what you take to the trail. What is your purpose? What is your reason? And for me, I want to read a little bit of what I wrote in my journal. This was a week after I got back from Spain. And I was thinking to myself, what are the reasons I'm going? I wanted to check this out. I wanted to do some research on what would it look like to take Village on a trip like this. But I also was kind of searching my own soul. I needed something out of this, but I couldn't identify it very concretely before I left. I had kind of a laundry list of reasons. And part of that was a little bit of reckoning in terms of the sense of kind of being on our own in the world, that all of us are really on our own. And here's what I wrote. And so this is a little bit about what the Camino meant to me. There's a sense that each of us is ultimately on our own. We lean on others, and relationships and community are necessary and life-giving and essential to not only our surviving but thriving. But each of us is on our own, and how we deal with our individual body and mind and emotions and soul. At the end of the day, all else can fall away, and we have only ourselves and God. And so to do this thing on my own, the Camino, with only myself and God, infused in me a new trust in God and in our relationship, and a new trust in myself and my relationship with me. I also did a very bodily thing. I walked for days. I'm still kind of astounded at all of this. I put my muscles and bones and limbs through the same repetitive motions over and over and took enough care of it that nothing wore out or got damaged or impeded the journey, a brief ankle issue accepted. In so doing, I gained greater respect for my body and its capabilities, and I feel inspired to take better care of it going forward. I also did a thing with my mind. I chose this thing, this Camino. I chose all these steps. I chose this grand adventure and deep inner journey over and over. I feel stronger and better for it. My mind feels clearer and more focused, not only because I did it, but because walking itself is one of the best things we can do physically for our mental health. And I would add to that physical health, emotional health, spiritual health, etc. Those of us who have the ability to walk, I said. My prayer life is stronger because of the Camino. What a privilege to be entrusted with the details of people's prayer requests and to carry those in my heart and in conversation with God as I walked. I moved through 2 weeks of my life at a human pace. I was very much in touch on the Camino with how much this is a human pace, that I'm walking. This is how we're built, right? Our structure is as a walking bipedal people. So I moved at a human pace, which I also defined as a humane pace, right? I don't think our pace of life in this country and in this day and age is a humane pace. And the Camino slows us down in that way. We have to focus. My attention was focused on walking, on my body, on locating food and water as I moved through each day. It was focused on a few material possessions, on the people right next to me, on the gorgeous landscape around me, on God and prayer and staying connected back home. The to-do list was never longer than a few items while on the Camino. The pace of life was humane and manageable. I lost touch, forgot even, about the weight of to-do lists and unfinished business and a house too big for me and full of things I don't truly need. Coming home, I felt the weight of those things again, although this time it feels balanced with a greater sense of I can. I can do the Camino. I can tackle these things and make life more simple and full all at the same time. I can do anything. So, oh gosh. So that's just a piece of my journal as I reflected a week after the fact. I took some intentional time to kind of process and think, what was this for me? What are all the ways that it impacted me? And it's been funny, some of the simple things, everyday things. I came back, and for some reason, is that one of my pictures? Oh, it is, the rainbow. That's right, thank you. All I could see was the foreground. So I came back, and for some reason, I feel really inspired to bake bread. How is that related to the Camino, right? Well, I ate a lot of really good bread along the way. Pastries and coffee and wine and all of that are a big thing in Spain. But there's something about bringing things home, right? And not having this kind of mass-produced everything in our lives. And the simple pleasures of life were really present to me as I walked and each day. And so I've been baking bread every week since I've been home. I've also been, I don't know why this is happening either, but again, you do things differently when you're on the Camino, and so I was hand washing my clothes a lot. I didn't take a lot of clothes, and so you hand wash every day or 2 or 3, and you dry things out, like in your room, or on a clothesline outside, and so I loved that. How are we out of touch with the fabulous pleasure of laundry that's been dried in the fresh air in the sun, right? And so I've put up a little clothesline in my screened-in porch, and I've been drying a lot of my things that way. It's so simple, but it's also a reminder to me physically that I'm different. I'm different on the inside, and that is also reflected that I'm different on the outside. And I've been taking a lot more pleasure slowly in just the very simple things of life. Conversation, simple pleasures, good food, those kinds of things. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the cathedral and arriving to Santiago. So there's this whole thing with the Camino that the destination is the city of Santiago, that we're going to the tomb of St. James. And I really want to wrestle with that a little bit because if you'll pause right here on the slides, that'd be great. I want to come back to this. What the Camino also teaches you is that it's about the journey. It's not actually about the destination, right? Great that you get to Santiago. Great that you go to the cathedral and do the Mass and you visit St. James's tomb. All of those things are incredibly powerful experiences, or they were for me. But what was even more powerful was the day-to-day, the hour-by-hour, the moment-by-moment experience of walking in community with people I'd never met before, doing this whole thing, all that it is. And I actually found there's a great book about returning from the Camino. So what's your process afterwards? How do you unpack all of this? How do you make meaning out of it? And so I've been reading this book, and what it talks about is Santiago is the destination in a way, but really the destination is the turnaround point where we feel our Camino is complete. I felt like my Camino started when I got to Madrid and landed and got off the plane. I also felt like it started when I made the decision to do the trip in the first place. I also felt like it started the day I stepped out of my hotel room and set foot on the trail. And it was kind of like, we're doing this? It's time. Okay, I guess I'm just walking. Like I just get started and go. And turns out that's all you do. And so what happens when you arrive? Like what are all of those meaningful points? And how do we process that and make meaning out of it? And so I've loved the thought of a turnaround point, because it actually wasn't Santiago for me, as powerful an experience as it was, to be in front of this magnificent cathedral, to be inside, and to be with folks like this guy, Hans. I want to talk about him just for a second. He's from Germany. He and his wife walked from their house. Wow. So where does your Camino begin, right? They walked from their home. I think it was 1,500 miles. It took them 3 months. I met them on day 100 of their walk. It took them over 3 months. I met them on day 100, and then a few days later, they arrived at the cathedral a couple of hours before me. And they were just so inspiring. I met a number of people who were inspiring for so many reasons. But this was just they really impacted me. It was really impressive. Are there photos of inside the cathedral somewhere? Friends from Indonesia? No, I don't think so. I think we've passed them. But a neat thing about the arrival in Santiago is there's a huge thurible, a huge incense burner that during the Mass is full of incense, and it swings over the heads of pilgrims, like really high. I think it goes like 40 miles an hour is what I've heard. And so they do this thing, and the whole place fills with incense, and it's just a spectacular experience. Yes, you see the thurible here. You can barely see little heads of people down at the very bottom. And so it takes 8 men to do this rope, and they all at the same time pull it up, and it swings up into the air, and then they get it going, and it goes back and forth for 5 or 10 minutes. And then you can see all the incense in the air after that. So there's a lot of Catholic pieces to this that you can engage along the way, or not. But it's a good question of what is the Camino for you, what is this experience, and how does it impact your life? One of the best gifts that I think the Camino provides is that I found it gave me a very singular focus. I had one task each day, which was to walk this part of the trail. And my focus was whatever task, whatever the trail demanded of me that day. I'm getting the 3-minute signal, which is a big deal for the live stream because we also have a worship service at 11. And so I'm going to ask that we jump to the slides towards the end because I want to tell you a little bit about the trip that we're looking at planning next year for Village folks that you are all invited to be part of. If we could go to the slides towards the end. Here we go. Yeah, that'd be great. So why I want to share the Camino with you. I find it to be a compelling way to interact with the world, to reckon with who we are, to encounter God, to believe in ourselves and our abilities, and to restore our hope in humanity. These are the things that I found of benefit from the Camino. And so I hope some of you will be interested in being part of this journey. We're looking, oh yes, Augustine is famous for saying, it is solved by walking. And lately I've wondered, could some of the folks involved in the conflicts of the world, what if they could take a walk together? Would we be in a different place? My prayer would be so. And so we're looking at a group of taking a group of 20, 25 people early September next year. This is a trip that I will lead. Soon we'll have information out and start receiving registration. There's some options to spend some time in Madrid beforehand or at the coast after. And then each day, my plan is that we would begin each day in prayer together, breakfast and prayer, that then everyone would walk at their own pace, and we'd all have a common destination to arrive at that afternoon or evening. So we'd have dinner together and we'd debrief the day. So people are free, we don't have to walk all as a group, to kind of meet people and to walk in pairs or on their own or whatever. But I found that flexibility to be really great. We'll prepare together by doing training hikes. I'll offer a hike probably once a month for everyone attending the trip. We'll do meetups to get to know each other and build community. We'll do some readings together and Bible study. Walking in the wilderness might have take on a different meaning. I read the Emmaus story again recently, and I hear it differently. I hear that Emmaus road differently having done this, because they were walking, right? And we'll do prep sessions to learn about all kinds of topics related to the trip. There's a great nonprofit called American Pilgrims on the Camino. If you want to check out any more about this, they have some excellent information. They're the ones that issue the little the credencial that you get the stamps. So there's a lot to know. Any questions? This is like the briefest overview ever. Yes, ma'am, Elizabeth.
I have two. Okay. The first one, how did the Hocus hold up?
They held up well. What I don't know is how many more miles they have in them, but they did well.
Okay. And did you get a lot of blisters, or?
No.
So you really wore the shoes in before you went?
I did. I trained in a different pair, but exactly the same model. I learned a lot about foot care and how to be very proactive about that. And that's one thing about the Camino. It's intense physically, it's intense mentally, it's intense emotionally and spiritually. Unfortunately, I experienced it in kind of that order. I had hoped spiritual would be first, but when you're in an arduous physical journey and you have to pay attention, like, is that a hot spot forming on my toe? This doesn't feel right. Am I about to get a blister? You got to stop at that moment and you have to take care of it. Because 5 miles down the trail, when you've got the blister, then you've got problems for infection, right? And so it's a very intense It engages all of your senses in that way in all parts of us. So I got 2 hot spots, but no blisters. I'm so proud of myself. Yes.
When you got off the trail, how long did it take you to get back on?
Like each day?
No, you said you missed a
Oh.
arrow one time and then.
Not long. I was very fortunate. Someone drove up next to me and said, are you a pilgrim? In Spanish. And I said, yes. And he said, the Camino's that way. And I was like, thank you. Muchas gracias. But it wasn't very far. It was maybe a quarter of a mile down the road. Thanks be to God.
What was the average number of miles you walked at a time?
My shortest day was probably 8, and my longest was 15 and a half. That's a stretch. I don't know if I want to do 15 again. Yes, ma'am.
How many days did you hike, and the trip that you're planning, how long of a trip would it be?
Yeah, thank you. So I walked the 74 miles to Santiago, I walked in 6 days. I did 40 miles after that. That was just kind of on my own, willy-nilly. The trip next year, this is something I'm trying to work out with a local company that hosts these groups, that you can hire someone to plan your route and book your accommodation and do all of that. And I'm working with them right now to figure out what that's going to be. I want to have a lower mileage than I had on the trip because I learned that lesson, and I want this to be accessible to a lot of people. At the same time, there are some tiny towns, and maybe 25 beds aren't available in a town, right, for our whole group to stay. And so there's also the option, I had to do this one day, I was breaking down, I was not going to get to my accommodation by evening. It was a very low point on the trip. And I ended up taking a taxi the last few miles because that was the only way I could do it safely and kind of not have a mental breakdown. And there's a long story behind that. But a taxi is always possible if the mileage is too long for any one person on the trip. So we're still figuring out like how big of a group we can take and how much we can stay. And we need to wrap up. Yes, ma'am.
This can all continue.
Okay.
Wave goodbye to the live.
Okay. Hello, live stream folks. Thank you for joining us. If you're seeing this after the fact and you have questions, just reach out by email or phone. I'm happy to help. Buen camino.